There we are. Yes, Lene, right before we even get started. All right. Second Samuel chapter 9. Yes. 2 Samuel chapter 9. The 2 Samuel chapter 9, all the way through chapter 20 of 2 Samuel, and then 1 Kings 1 and 2. This is the section of the Bible that is known as the court history of David. It's all about David and his reign as king. And if you remember last time we were here, I was here anyways, David became king. He was king over part of Israel first, part of what we know as Israel, the whole nation of Israel. And then he became, after a civil war took place, he became ruler over all of Israel. And he moved the capital down to Jerusalem, which he actually had to conquer, so that it was a central location for them to raise, so they can have a political and religious leadership, all in one place, in the city of Jerusalem. It was actually a Jebusite city. And so we know that he conquered that, and he became king, and he's ruling, put down the Philistine threat, and he was told, if you remember last time, he was told that he's living his bayet, his house, his palace, and he wants to build a bayet, a temple for God. And God says, not you, but your son, and I'm going to build for you a bayet, a dynasty, a house, a line, a lineage that will be forever ending. And that's why we see Jesus coming from the bayet of David, the house of David. And it's such a, and we saw that beautiful word that David, just in his response to the covenant of God last time we were there, and what a beautiful time that was. So as we get into the court history of David, we're actually going to see something that's unique to the Bible in the ancient Near East. Remember, ancient Near East, I keep using that term. Let's refresh what that term means. It's the East. So you think Asia, Israel, Mesopotamia, Turkey, all that. It's East, but it's near to the West. So it's the Near East. And it's from the past. It's ancient. So ancient Near East. That in this case, we're talking about what would be Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel, Egypt, all that area today. Back then they had different names, but the same area. And we're going to see something that's really unique in the ancient Near East writings, is we're going to see both the good and the bad of a ruler. As far as I'm aware of, and I'm not going to promise this, there could be something out there I don't know about, but everything I've read from the ancient Near East about the rulers, it's all praise this guy is almost a god, or inhabited by a god, or is a god, and they're only good. And anything bad that happens, they strike from history, and they don't write it down, and so we really have like these skewed views of these rulers, because they don't write down their failures, they don't write down their problems, they don't write, because they're seen as next to gods, they don't, or even the embodiment of a god, so they can't have bad things that happen, they can't make mistakes. Gods don't do that. But David, we're going to see the good and the bad of a man, and a ruler of Israel. Now, David will begin his reign after in this court in chapter 9. He says, David asks, "Is there anyone remaining from Saul's family?" Because remember, he showed a lot of loyalty to Saul. He was actually really upset when this man who's trying to kill him died, because he saw that God anointed Saul, so he wanted to support Saul even if he knew that Saul was doing wrong. And he was really upset when Saul died. And he says, "Is there anyone left that I can be so?" Because for Jonathan's sake. Now remember, Jonathan was Saul's son. that they were besties, best friends, and Jonathan did a lot for David in like warning him, helping him get away from his father, fighting with him. And he says, there was a servant in Saul's family named Ziba. They summoned him to David and said to him, "Are you Ziba? I am your servant," he replied. And the king asked, "Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I can show kindness to?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still Jonathan's son, who was injured in both feet." And the king asked, "Where is he?" And Ziba answered the king, "You'll find him at Lo-debar," which means, that's interesting, not the word, "at the house of Michar, son of Amiel." So David sent him and brought him to the house of Michar, son of Amiel, in Lo-debar. And Mishbosheth, there's a fun word. I bet that was fun to learn to spell in kindergarten. Son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, fell face down, and paid homage. And David said, "Mishbosheth, I am your servant. Don't be afraid." David said to him, "Since I intend to show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan, I will restore you to all your grandfather's Saul's field, and you will always eat meals at my table." Wow. This is not something that kings normally do. This is a man who possibly could claim the throne, say, "Well, I was Saul's son, Jonathan's son. I have a better right to the claim of the kingdom than you do." And most kings would have just said, "Well, here's the guy left, let's kill him, so there's no one to claim my throne." And David says, "No, because your father, because of Jonathan, I'm going to give you your field. I'm going to let you eat at my table." And that's that is something. And on top of that, he was an invalid. He had injured in both his feet, which at that time period meant he couldn't work, and it was the beggar's life for him. That was how he worked. He was going to be a beggar. And that's just something amazing. And it shows David is merciful, kind David. In chapter 10, sometimes later, the king of the Ammonites died, and David will choose not to go to battle with them. This is actually where David starts getting into trouble. I like this. Sometime later, the Ammonite died. Son of Hanun became the king in his place. Then David said, "I'll show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash." Remember that, the snake? If you remember that last time, Nahash was the snake, that vile person that was the leader. Just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent his emissaries to console Nanun concerning his father. However, they arrived in the land of the Ammonites. The Ammonite leader said to Hanun, their lord, "Just because David has sent men to console you, do you really believe he shows respect to your father? Instead, he hasn't. David sent his emissaries in order to scout out spies and demolish it." So these people are putting all these lies into their head, saying you need to conquer them. And so they took the emissaries, shaved off half their beards, cut their clothes, half to the hips, sent them away. This was to shame them. They were deeply humiliated, it says. It says, "Stay in Jericho until your beards grow out." And so anyways, David will, the Ammonites will march out and line up in battle and formation to the city. And Joab will go into battle. But David doesn't go. And this is a big thing. This is a big turning point for we see in David's career, because he doesn't go into battle. Remember, he's the military leader that's been ruling. He's been leading in battle. Now, for us, we think none of our leaders go into battle. I mean, can you imagine Biden going into battle? I mean, we don't think about it. Our generals don't go into battle. Everyone stays back. We have we send the pawns first, right? But in those days, it was very common and actually expected that the king would go into battle and lead the forces. And David does not go into battle. He will lead from his new palace, which is going to get him into trouble. In chapters 11 and 12, we have the pivotal moment in David's career. He's had such wonderful success until here. During the Ammonite battle, he decides, or actually his people decide that he's too valuable to go into battle, and he stays behind. David felt he was, he could pay more attention to the government. His advisors may have insisted that he no longer go into battle. He's irreplaceable, they might have said. But the passage in chapter 11 begins when the time that kings go off to war. David is not where he's supposed to be. Where is he at? He's taking a stroll on his balcony. He's not where he's supposed to be. Now we can learn something about this. He's not where he's supposed to be. This is when sin often enters into our lives, is when we're not where we're supposed to be. That doesn't mean if you get sinned against, you're in the wrong place. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you're the one doing the sinning, oftentimes it's because you're not where you're supposed to be in the first place. I mean, think about, people that, you're caught up in greed or lust or pornography or whatever. You're in a place where you're not supposed to be in the first place. And so one day he's on a roof, and he's strolling on his roof in his balcony, and his palace is on this hill, and we found and you can go look up archaeologically where his palace is, and we found it, or we think we found it anyways. It's in ruins now, but, we see where it was. It's up on top of this hill, and it would have been looking over all of Jerusalem. So he's out there in a time when kings go off to war. Now he's out there, and he sees a beautiful woman taking a bath. Now Bathsheba is not doing anything wrong. It's not like she's up on her roof saying, "Ooh, I hope the king sees me." This is a time before water heaters, where they had flat roofs, and what they did is you would often go up on the roof. This is the place where Jesus goes in the time of Jesus. He goes up on the roof to pray. And the flat roofs, people you do things on their roof. Flat roofs, and one of the things that you do is you bathe up there. No one else can see you. You're outside of the realm of everyone except the king up in his palace. And the tub is up on the roof being heated by the sun. That's how they heated their water. So she's up there just doing what she's supposed to do. This is where she can be at privacy. This is where the water can be warm. This is where she can get nice and clean. She's where she's supposed to be. Now, he sees her, and he's filled with lust for her. And he commands her presence in the palace. Now, you're going to read, if you read commentators on this, there's going to be an argument over whether this is rape or consensual. And I mean, think about, is it consensual when one has that much power over someone that commands it? I mean, I lean towards rape. But you're going to read the arguments are there. In my opinion, he's the king. He commands her to come. She doesn't have much of a choice in the matter. It's rape in my mind. So David commits this rape. Now, like I said, not everyone's going to agree with me on that, but I'm going to say it was rape. And so he commits this rape, and she becomes pregnant with David's child. And this indiscretion will bring down his kingship. This will be the thing that in the long term will bring down his kingship. Now, David is... I don't think he's sorry for his sin at all. I think what he is feels guilty that he might be caught because she's pregnant. He's afraid of being caught more than he is of her of feeling guilty and remorseful at this point in his life. Now he will show more remorse later on, but that's not where he's at this point. In fact, he's actually just going to try to cover up his sin. And we know this all too often. We see this is very common in tales when there's adultery in a relationship. You lie and you cover up. And so David will call her husband, who's actually one of his fighting men, his 30 fighting men, his top soldiers. He has this group of 30 men that are his troops, that they will have been with him since before when they were running away from Saul. That he has these men that are like his best men. And Uriah the Hittite, not even a Israelite, he's a Hittite, which is kind of a big deal. Hittites at this time period would have been north of the Philistine people. Their history is pretty cool. We didn't even know about it till like 100 years ago. Up to 100 years ago, they thought the Hittites were something made up in the Bible. And we discovered them, and we found the Ugaritic text and all these stuff, the history of the Hittites, and it's amazing. And we learned so much from the Ugaritic text about what the Canaanites and the Mesopotamians believe, and their cycle of Baal and Anat, and it's just we've learned so much because our archaeology discoveries have discovered the Hittites, and so he's the Uriah the Hittite, and so he calls her home, and he calls him home, and we learn that he's one of the fighting men. We learned that actually in 2 Samuel 23 when that's stated. And he calls him home not to confess, but to cover up his sin. One sin leads to another. So he tries to get Bathsheba and Uriah to sleep together so that Uriah will think the child is his. Uriah actually refuses to sleep because he felt that it was unpatriotic, really, to sleep, enjoy the pleasures of his wife while his friends and his men were dying in the field and fighting. So he refuses to bed his wife. Sleeps on the floor. So I can't do it. I won't enjoy this pleasure while my friends are dying. And so, David decides that, that's not working. So I'm going to send Uriah back to battle carrying a secret order to Joab. Now remember, Joab is his general, his fix-it man. He's the one he's the hatchet man. He's the one who solves David's problems. And he's going to carry a secret order. He's actually going to be carrying his own death order himself. He's carrying his own death order. And so he says to Joab in this letter, put him in the front lines and let everyone come back, so he's going to be killed. I need him dead. So Uriah, this is one of his top soldiers, been with him forever, carries his death sentence from David. Just these sins piling up on top of each other. And it will happen. Uriah will die. And after a proper period of mourning, Bathsheba will be entered into the king's harem. He'll be another wife of King David. under the guise that, I mean, and who's fooled? No one's fooled. Everyone saw her come into the kingdom. Everyone knows. I mean, it's not like these things are secret. But under the guise that he's taking care of one of his soldiers. And his wife. So he'll enter in. Now, Nathan is the prophet at that time. Nathan is David's prophet. He's the spiritual advisor to the king. And he will confront David with what he's done. And he challenges him. And this is actually another unique moment of David, because most of the time when a king is challenged in such a way, what happens to the messenger? That's right, you die. But David, instead of banishing or killing Nathan for his audacity, David, faced with his guilt, he admits that he's wrong. He admits that he's wrong. And I love this, Psalm 51. Turn to Psalm 51 if you would. This is the Psalm of David. And this is David's confession. So I want to read David's confession here. It says, for the choir director, the Psalm of David. When the prophet Nathan came to him after he had gone to Bathsheba. Okay, here's where it begins. Be gracious to me, God, according to your faithful love. That's your chesed. According to your abundant compassion, blot out my rebellion. Interesting, that right there, I'll stop right there. In most times in ancient Near East, when the king did wrong, they would blot it out of history, literally strike it from the books. And he's saying, God, I'm not going to deny that I'm wrong, but I need you to blot out my transgression. Not from the history books, but from your record, God, because that's the record that matters. I need you to blot it out from your records. It says, completely wash away my guilt and cleanse me from my sin. For I am conscious of my rebellion, and my sin is always before me. Against you and you alone have I sinned and done this evil in your sight. Now, you could argue that he's done a lot of other things against a lot of other people too, but he sees, in the way he's saying, he's like, in the end, it all comes down to I was wrong against you. So you are right when you pass sentence. You are blameless when you judge. Indeed, I was guilty when I was born. I was sinful when my mother conceived me. Surely you desire integrity in the inner self and teach me wisdom deep within. Purify me with hyssop. Hyssop is it refers to a purification process of cleansing. Hyssop is a spice, and that refers to this purification process. And I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Turn your face away from sins and blot out all my guilt. God, create a clean heart for me and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not banish me from your presence or take away your Holy Spirit from me. Rejoice, restore the joy of your salvation to me and sustain me and give me a willing spirit. Then I will teach the rebellious your ways, and sinners will return to you. Save me from the guilt of bloodshed, God. God of my salvation, and my tongue will sing of your righteousness. Lord, open my lips with my mouth. I will declare your praises. You do not want a sacrifice, or I would give it. Whoa, right there. That's something unique. This is the Old Testament where they give sacrifices all the time. It's one of the main roles of the temple. And he's recognizing you don't want temptation. You don't want it. It's not about that sacrifice. It's about my heart change. See, even in the Old Testament, they recognized that the sacrifices were a mode of forgiveness, but it wasn't about those sacrifices. It was about the heart. And we'll see that reversal come in like the time of Isaiah and Amos, and where they start focusing on the sacrifice and forget about the heart. and they'll be all religious form and no actual substance. So that attitude right there, we'll see a reversal of as later on. But this is very important for you. You don't need sacrifice. I don't want sacrifice, or I would give it. You are not pleased with burnt offerings. The sacrifice pleased to God is a broken spirit. You will not despise a broken or humble heart, God. In your good pleasure, cause Zion to prosper. That is, Zion is Jerusalem. Build the walls of Jerusalem. Then you will delight in righteous sacrifice, whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered at your altar. So he says, if your heart is right, then you rejoice in the sacrifices, not the other way around. And so it's very important that they get it right. It's about the heart, then the sacrifice. And this actually goes back to, remember, Cain and Abel. Right, all the way back to Cain and Abel. The heart must proceed, be first, and then the sacrifice. And so we see this. What a beautiful blessing this is. Now, Bathsheba will give birth to a child, and that child will die. It will die at birth. And it was seen as a reason because of his sin against Uriah and against God. Now, that being said, child mortality is not that high in these time periods. It's not really that uncommon for children to die. We have, sudden infant death syndrome. They used to credit it to a demon, Lilith, who would come and take babies in their sleep. That's why, circumcision happens at 8 days because they could actually handle it somewhat there. But it wasn't until 8 years old that they were really considered hey, this one might survive. Wouldn't that be heartbreaking? Raise a child for 8 years and then I can't even imagine. That's how old my son is, 8 years old. Not long afterwards, a second child, Solomon, will be born from Bathsheba and David. Now, we're going to need to remember the name Solomon. He's going to be a big one. Interesting enough that in chapter 12, we'll see after Solomon's birth, David returns to the battlefield. He goes back where he should have been the whole time. He goes back to the battlefield. He leads in the defeat of the Ammonites against them. But the heartache in David's family is not over. If you look at 2 Samuel 13, you'll see another really heart-wrenching passage in the Bible that the Bible doesn't shy away from, doesn't explain always, it doesn't give me happy answers. We're going to see that Absalom, one of David's children, and his son Absalom, his daughter Tamar. They're children of David's wives. Absalom and Tamar are one wife, and Amnon, another son, is of a different wife. So they're same dad, different moms. So you have Absalom and Tamar, brother and sister, same mom, same parents. Amnon, stepchild, from another mom. Amnon, it says in there, fell madly in love with Tamar, his half-sister. Madly in love with her. Now, is it real love? No. We're going to know it's not love because of what happens next. Okay. So he falls madly in love with his beautiful half-sister, and there's no way they can be married because they're brother and sister. So at the suggestion of a cousin, this is a real stand-up guy, the lovesick Amnon persuades David to send Tamar to his house to cook for him while he pretends to be ill. So she's caring for him while he pretends to be in, and while she's there, he rapes her. After he gets what he wants, he refuses to marry her. And it says that actually, as much as he loved her, he now hated her. Yeah. But he refuses to marry her, which means Tamar would probably never be able to marry. Her virginity was considered essential for marriage in those days. And here's one thing that just makes me angry. I'm going to flat out. I hate David for this right here. He takes no action against Amnon. He does nothing. I'm like, what kind of dad are you? I mean, I know it's your son, but come on, that's your daughter. And he does nothing. And it makes me mad. I'm furious at that. So 2 years later, Absalom invites Amnon to a party. And under orders from Absalom, his servants wait until Amnon was drunk, and then they stab him to death. So his brother takes revenge for his sister Tamar. Now Absalom, with Joab's help, will flee to Geshur, his mother's homeland. Because David will order that, because under law, Absalom has to be killed. Because apparently raping your sister, that's okay. But killing your brother, that's not okay. Makes me mad. Makes me mad. This is David's reign. Good and the bad of the man. All right. So then chapter 2 of 14, we have a fun one. Let's go ahead and read some of 14. 2 Samuel 2, chapter 14. We won't read all of it, but let's read a section of that. All right, so Joab realized that the king's mind was on Absalom. So he sent someone to Tekoa to bring a wise woman from there. And he told her, pretend to be in mourning, dress in the mourning clothes, and put on oil. Act like a woman who has been in mourning for the dead for a long time. Go to the king and speak these words to him. When the woman came from Tekoa to the king, she fell face down on the ground, paid homage, and said, help me, your majesty. What's the matter, the king asked her. Sadly, I'm a widow. My husband had died, she said. Your servant had 2 sons. They were fighting in the field when no one separated them, and one struck the other and killed him. Now the whole clan has risen up against your servant and said, hand over the one who killed his brother, so that we may put him to death, for the life of the brother he is murdered. We will eliminate the heir. They would be extinguished, my one remaining ember, by not preserving my husband's name, to the prosperity on earth. And the king told the woman, go home, I will issue command on your behalf. Then the woman of Tekoa said to the king, my lord, the king may blame be on me and my father's family, and may the king and his throne be innocent. And anyways, they'll use this story to reveal that, hey, you need to let your son Absalom come home. This sad story, and since there's no living male to carry on the family name, she killed the king to protection of the murder. And David rules in the end that the need for an heir to carry his father's name was more important than punishment for murder. When David had so ruled, the grieving mother suddenly turns and rebukes David for not allowing his son Absalom to come home. And he'll take this opportunity. Now there's a court precedent, and he'll have Joab bring Absalom home, but on the condition that he's never allowed to see his father again. He's not allowed to see him. It's pretty rough. But Absalom will actually become a thorn in his father's side. Now, I want to say there's probably some resentment over taking no action again on Tamar, making him wait 2 years and do it. I'm going to say there's a lot of resentment there. He fled. There's more building resentment going on there. And on top of that, he's the child that's supposed to take the reign, and David favors Bathsheba's child. So there's building resentment there. But Absalom is not content with being allowed to return to Jerusalem. He asked Joab to come see him. Joab will refuse twice, but on the third time, after Absalom lights Joab's barley field on fire, Joab agrees to persuade David to allow Absalom to return to court as well. So, he's not exactly playing nice. He's going back to court now because, he's setting fire to fields. David agrees, and Absalom begins a systematic campaign to undermine his father's authority, take away his father's power, including he will rape David's concubine in public to prove that David can't protect his own harem. He will stand at the palace gates, and when a man would come to a problem before the king, Absalom said, "Oh, the king's too busy to see you. Let me deal with it. I'll handle your problem." And he's taking away the power. He would do things like, as people would come to bow before the prince, no, you don't need to bow before me. I'm one of your friends. I'm here to help you. The king, now he'll embrace people like a brother. So he steals the heart of the people. And in chapter 15, verse 6, it says, he stole the heart of the people. He's a politician. And in chapters 15 through 17, we're going to see a rebellion of Absalom that will really it'll break your heart. After 4 years, Absalom makes a move. He sends words to his supporters to gather at Hebron. Remember the first capital? And he tells David he's going to celebrate a feast, and he receives David's blessing for the trip. Once there, he proclaims himself king in the old capital. Proclaims himself king. And some of David's court advisors will be there supporting Absalom. Hearing the news, David chooses to run away. He doesn't want to fight his own son, so he runs away. He makes plans to leave Jerusalem. He instructs 10 of his wives to stay behind to take care of his house, but all his servants and his personal bodyguards go away. Leaving Jerusalem, David goes across the Kidron Valley, which separates the eastern boundary from the west of the city from the Mount of Olives, and crosses the mountain, and he will be joined by Ziba, the servant of Mishbosheth, who bring offering for food and drink and donkeys for David and his household to ride. Mishbosheth, interesting enough, has actually gone over to Absalom's side. This boy he saved and taken care of has gone over to Absalom's side. So Absalom will enter into Jerusalem unopposed because David's fled. And his first act, one of his first acts was to have sexual relationships with David's concubine in full view of everybody. Which sounds really gross to us, but there's pornography on TV. But what the reason he does that is to show that I have taken over my father's kingdom. there was very mild, a manly loin thing going on there. I've taken over my father's kingdom. There's nothing he can do about it. I am the stronger one. He's incompetent. Can't even keep his women in. He's now. David will go into the Transjordan, and he's actually near the spot where Jacob was wrestling with the angel, and he turns around and he prepares to go back and retake the city from his son. He divides his army into 3 sections, putting commanders over each. David wants to lead, but his commanders refuse to let him go. In essence, they're saying, you won't do what's necessary. He's your son. And so they refuse. Commanders, as they leave, David asks that they deal gently with Absalom. The battle will rage on in the forest of Ephraim. A patrol spots Absalom, gives chase. Absalom's mule runs under an oak. His head is caught in a tree branch. He's left hanging there by his head, hair, and Joab finds him and orders his men to kill him. And he kills Absalom. Joab will actually personally kill him himself and have his body thrown into a pit covered with stones. You can read about that in chapter 18. When the messengers bring the news to David, he weeps loudly, lamenting Absalom's death. When the people hear of him lamenting, their shouts over the hard-won victory turn to silent shame, it says. And that's a great deal of David's kingship. Hold on. And that will be really how 2 Samuel ends. That's really about where it ends. I'm trying to decide. We've got 10 minutes left. I'm trying to decide if I want to go into Kings next or just wait till next week. I think we're just going to call it and go into Kings next week. We've kind of had an emotional... let's call it for the night, and we'll go into Kings. We'll start with 1 Kings chapters 1 and 2 next week. I don't want to push us too hard. But we'll deal. 1 Kings will really begin by dealing with the results of Absalom's death. All right. Do we have anything we want to say? Comments, questions, concerns? Yes, ma'am. Did he write that psalm after the baby died? I would say yes, but we don't know exactly when he wrote it. We know it's according to Psalm after Nathan does his thing. So maybe not, maybe. I like to think he did, but I don't know. Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, let's pray ourselves out of here. Would anyone like to close us in prayer? All right, Rudy, thank you.
Okay. Father God, we just come before you right now. We thank you.